Today for our lecture, I'm trying to figure out the best way to record these so that you have access to what you need. So we're just gonna go this way and try to do it with Teams, and then I will upload it to YouTube. Okay, so I just wanted to present here, and hopefully it could be a little in the little corner. We are talking about one of my favorite topics this week. This is actually the reason I got into the communication discipline. So my bachelor's degree is in political science, and I was doing a minor in communication, and I took a class called political communication, and that class changed the direction of my life, truly. And so it's fun to be here. It's fun to teach. It's fun to teach this topic because that was something that I loved just so much. So we're talking about mass media in a democratic society. The subtitle of this is Keeping a Promise. So I hope you can kind of keep that in the back of your mind because whether you realize it or not, the media plays a crucial role in whether or not a democracy or a republic can flourish. And if we don't have a solid media, what do I mean by solid? If we don't have good, um, unbiased media outlets, we tend to not have the best knowledge to be able to function in society. So, in my study of political societies and transitions of power between types of government, it seems to be very clear that the first thing to go is communication and the like communication outlets, but not just communication outlets. In addition to that, it's also how information is presented by those communication outlets. I should be sharing some things with you today that should be relatively alarming for you. And if they're not, it might be a point of consideration, like what's culturally going on that what I'm sharing is not alarming. I say that because I actually was talking to my 16-year-old about this recently, and he seemed kind of unfazed by it. Like he had a lot of questions about why is this a big deal? And that's a question of luxury. So we're going to kind of talk about that. All right. Hopefully we can get into it. Now, this I'm going to minimize myself really quickly here so we can see the full screen. Um, oh, just kidding. I'm as minimized as I can get. All right. Well, anyway, I'll move myself around. Um, so this book is from this book, or this quote is from a book called WikiLeaks. It's The Ethics of Secrecy. I don't know. You can kind of see it coming in and out. That's really funny. Um, I want to read this quote because there's something here that's very fascinating for me. Now, this book was published 5 years ago, and as I was reading through it, it feels like almost a lifetime ago. So much has changed. And so I just want to acknowledge that 5 years ago, well, it depends on how old you are, is not that long ago, but because we've had so many shifts in our experiences as communities and cultures and nations, that this feels like almost ancient history. So, anyway, I hope you find this quote interesting. It's from that book. The editors are Cotton and Arp. And this is from their introduction. So it starts off secrets. Everybody has them. For the most part, they're personal and harmless, but often enough they're not. And when those secrets are held and guarded by powerful institutions and organizations in both public and private sectors, government agencies and departments, transnational corporations, non-governmental organizations, supranational is what I'm supposed to say, economic institutions whose reach and influence affects millions or even billions of people, often without their knowledge or consent, we are facing a much different scenario. Okay. So personal secrets versus national secrets, different scenarios. At that point, it becomes a matter of ethical importance. As the philosophical study of right and wrong action, good and bad character, just and unjust institutions, ethics brings a substantial weight to the questions of just when, if ever, secrecy is important. Okay, so in so many ways, what we were talking about in this chapter is distilled into this quote. Like having a unbiased media that exists is critical for transparency. So secrecy then is the opposite of transparency. So if we even think about this in terms of Aristotle's golden mean, on one side we would have secrecy, on the other side we would have transparency. And ideally in governance, we want that golden mean, we want somewhere in the middle. So hopefully, as we kind of go through this lecture, you can see that there's a lot going on here. This is not just about like whether or not you like the news or whether or not you like reporting. Hopefully you can see that there's quite a bit of depth here, and it's relatively important for the communities that we live in, and then not just those communities, but also like where we go in the future. And I know a lot of people are talking about this right now, particularly because of the presidential election, but I don't think that we can underscore it enough. I think those of us who are very keyed into this topic about secrets are and exposure and transparency are pretty concerned by what we see. Hence the reason there's kind of all this fervor around information. Okay, let's go to the next grade. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about reflecting on why um, and what you believe as far as like philosophically good journalism. Like, what's the goal of journalism and strategic communication in a modern democracy? It's not uncommon for much of our news to be written by public relations professionals. So, in that case, strategic communication and strategic communication professionals are just as important as journalists. And so, let us, as we talk about journalism throughout this, let us just assume that anybody who's working in strategic communication falls under that umbrella, right? Everybody in that umbrella is a journalist of some sort. Okay, we're going to talk about fake news. We're going to talk about how to kind of look at it. Um, got another book here for you that I'm working on right now. It's called Foolproof. So again, one of my favorite topics ever. So I'll be touching on that just a little bit. We're going to understand the various institutional roles that the media plays when it comes to governing. I'm going to be talking about kind of historically what this has looked like versus what it looks like now, and why we can see just this sharp difference in the importance of media in governance. Okay. And then lastly, we're going to be able to talk about how to evaluate political communication. Now, remember, political communication, both strategic and journalistic, through a single ethical framework. And we're going to kind of use Rawls' veil of ignorance, but in an informational way to kind of figure out like what is valuable information to understand. Okay. All right. So here we go. Now, I'll just tell a little story as I move my little screen up here. Um, I very vividly remember, this is also how nerdy I am, but I very vividly remember being at the university library as an undergraduate and working on a paper for my political communication class. And I was working on a paper for one of my political science classes at the same time. So I was doing kind of an overlap of like topic, excuse me, so I could get deeper into it. And I found a book, and I remember sitting down in the aisle of the library, and it was called The Watchdog. And I started reading this book and I was just captivated. Like it is an obsession for me. Um, I'm just getting so excited. Okay, it's like an obsession for me. And I remember reading the introduction of that book, and the book was all about the fourth estate and how the media in its truly unbiased form, media that's good, that goes through proper channels and like has a solid editor. We have solid like many people, many hands are seeing this. Multiple journalists are working on a story, or strategic communication personnel are working on the story. Like we get good quality stuff that like keeps people in power in check. So one thing I love about journalism and strategic communications who work in this sphere is that it's supposed to keep people in power in check. And if we look at historically, it does. That's the case, right? So let's talk about like any congressman who does something stupid and it gets released into the public, like news media gets a hold of it. Um, some might say, "Oh, they're just out to get us." Sometimes President Trump used the witch hunt idea. I just think it's a little ridiculous. But the point is to hold people in power accountable because sometimes when you're so powerful, there's like nothing else that can hold you accountable. So you'll see like with these congressmen, right? The next thing you know, those congressmen are retiring or they're suddenly terminating their service because they have done something they should have been doing. So that is the power of the media. Fourth estate, huge, like this is critical, right? For it's the fourth, we used to call it the fourth pillar of the government. It's so important. But here's what we have, okay? And this is the reality of it. We have a withering fourth estate. It's going away. It's not working like it was supposed to work. Things are changing at a rapid pace, which is why 5 years ago now feels like ancient history, because all of a sudden more and more information is coming out that's suggesting that people in power are using corruption to hold news agencies by the throat. So certain information is not released to the public. And I'll give you an example, a case study of that as we kind of go through this. All right, so let's look at the slide. Media organizations are act as a watchdog to the government. What that mean? What the metaphor of the watchdog means is basically they're there based at all times. Like you step out of line, you cross the line, they're there to get you. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a military dog training performance. I say performance because it is the most incredible thing. Um, my husband did the Air Force for a little while, and we were on an Air Force base, and we were at a demonstration of the canines that work with the Air Force and how they work with both criminals and terrorists and individuals who have crossed certain lines. So we're sitting in the bleachers, we're watching this demonstration, and there's this point where one of the volunteers from the audience gets in a full bodysuit and it's like padded, like super thick, and they're supposed to be the criminal. And so the trainer and the dog's on one side, the guy who volunteered is on the other side, and the trainer says to the dog when the man over here is ready to get him, whatever the command is. I think it's actually in German. I don't really know what the command is. And that guy started running, right? Like these guys, they're in their early 20s, like you were. They were in tip-top condition because they had to be. And he is literally right. It took 3 seconds for that dog to be on him. Like he hit him from the back. He hit him from the back, knocked him over. And when we talked to him later, he said he couldn't even breathe. The dog had come up behind him so fast and so hard. That's basically what the journalism is supposed to be for our government, for governments that have representative democracies. Okay, there was a period of time when that was the case, and it is no longer. All right. So when we talk about the withering fourth estate, basically what we're talking about is a scenario where we have the man running and we have like an old dog who's distracted by a butterfly going this way, and the other man over here is running this way. Jeffrey Epstein case is a perfect example of this. I think also an interesting kind of reflection on this might be if you're aware of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. If you've done any research with them, I'm trying to think of other examples because I know not everybody really pays attention to politics or that kind of dynamic that happens. But basically, it's like they're trying to speak out about some things that happened to them. And yet there's this little dog that's running around being like, woof, 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 like not really holding anybody accountable. Oh, I can't believe I just did that on It's great. But anyway, I just am very passionate about this. That, we're supposed to have a very strong dog knocking over people in power if they cross that line, right? If they stay within the boundaries of appropriate behavior and transparency and, no corruption, honesty, like value-based decision making, then there's shouldn't be no reason for this kind of intensity and this intense metaphor. But the case is that we know when people get into power, they just love it, right? I love it. Okay, so I'm going to read these next two paragraphs. For one institution to check the power of another, belief in the institution itself and what it represents is essential. So if the media holds the government in check, then we have to believe the media is good, wholesome, and will hold the other organizations, the other governmental institutions in check. So we have to like believe in them. All of a sudden, we're like doing the like Santa Claus kind of thing. Like you've got to believe for this to work. But in truth, that is the case. We've got to believe for this to work. The next paragraph. General public is skeptical, even cynical, about whether news media can get stories right and whether journalists and strategic communication professionals and news organizations are motivated by professional norms or partisan strife. Like how much are they influenced? And that's what's interesting about this class is that there's a lot of things that can come into play, right? Like loyalty, we talked about last week. Are you loyal to your role or are you loyal to the human that might be involved or the other organizations? Or, like there was a whole list, right, from last week of things that a person could be loyal to. But we got to believe that they can do that and that they will do that. There was a period of time, and as far as I'm aware, this research hasn't changed. I might be wrong. Someone might find something different, but the most honest people in society were medical doctors and journalists. Like they wanted truth, they were willing to seek it, and they were willing to tell it. And so when we consider that journalists are among the top 3 most honest people that exist in this world, then why are we being so critical about them? Why are we being so hard on them? There's a lot of questions there. So then who has created this distrust? Where has the distrust come from? I have a lot to say about that, but I'm gonna just go to the next slide because I don't want to record a like 40-hour lecture for you guys. Okay, I'm gonna move myself again. Okay, all right. So there are 3 philosophically based roots of this problem, like how this works. The first one is Enlightenment's vision of truth. Okay, this idea like the truth is out there and we can find it. It's a very motivating thing. It's actually a philosophical orientation. It's not something that's existed in the world for very long. I mean, if you consider the history of the world and the history of humanity. So this is a way of being, this idea of like the truth is out there. We can find it if we just keep looking, if we just keep trying to discover it. Okay, so that's one of the roots of this. The second one is the First Amendment. We are incredibly lucky. And I don't think it's until we lose these rights that we're going to realize how just insanely lucky we are. One, to get balloons, but also to have speech protected, to have news agencies protected, and to be able to resist the power that is in place by the government. The First Amendment is so utterly important. I cannot even like I have a witness of it, like I have a spiritual witness of how important the First Amendment is. Brother Dave teaches a class about the First Amendment, so if that's something that you're interested in, I would recommend it. I hear it's very intense, but I don't think you'll never see this kind of information in the same way. Like you'll never see how important speech is in the same way. Okay, third philosophical root, a vision of the purpose of political power, to understand why it exists, why it's so important. I'm going to keep reading that paragraph in just a second, but I hope you see like We started teaching you all this stuff in primary school, and we're still teaching it to you. Why? Because it's critical. It's critical for organizations to be able to function, um, for people to be safe, for us to gather in communities, without fear. Like I just I don't think we understand how valuable and important having governments systems that are relatively good, in place, how important it is. Okay, finishing the paragraph. The purpose of government was to provide security to the populace so that it would act in such a way as to conform to a higher authority. So we just got to remember that, right? We've got to remember that we, how can I say this? Have you ever driven in a place where the traffic is not very well regulated? It's like insane. It is chaotic. And in so many ways, it's a metaphor for what life could be like if we didn't have kind of these kind of guiding institutions for us. All right, next paragraph. All right, next thing. Disinformation and junk news. Now I'm putting my little face on top of his little face, and I think my recording might actually stop. So I just want to give you a heads up on that. I'm going to talk about junk news. I'm going to pause it and then I'm going to record a little bit more so you have segments to watch instead of one enormous thing. Although I don't, maybe it doesn't matter. Okay, disinformation. This is the transformation to junk news. So I don't know if you remember learning about the yellow journalism. This is when people were making stuff up so they could sell newspapers. And the philosophical opposition to that was like an unbiased news system. And what happened was when we suddenly had an unbiased news system, all of a sudden we could see like, whoa, this is powerful. It's when we had this experience during the revolution, we knew it was powerful. We lost sight of it. We started making up stuff to sell newspapers to make money. Then we swung back to it. We were like, no, we've got to have an unbiased news system. Here's the crazy part. We've swung back to basically yellow journalism. And that's when they talk about junk news, that's what they mean by that. Okay. So junk news isn't exactly a total fabrication, but it can be a sensationalizing of some facts. Okay. It's like hyperbolizing certain areas for it to be more exciting. This was yellow journalism. All right. Um, the substitution of trivial content for more important and consequential information, or an attempt to provide opinion without weighing all of the evidence. So just having a little bit of evidence and then just a bunch of opinions about that little bit of evidence. Very common in our news cycles. And part of the reasons why comes from a hypothesis that was written by Bennett, that's his last name, out of the University of Washington. And he argues that because of the 24/7 news cycle, we basically have screwed ourselves over. We only have time to gather a little bit of evidence because we're trying to have things be released all of the time. And that doesn't allow us to have quality news. Um, People argue that's an excuse, like we could still have quality news, although the constraints of the time do make sense. Okay, junk news is alternative facts, whatever that means, right? These slivers of truth. This is where we have strategic communication professionals pushing the boundaries of what unbiased journalism was supposed to be. And the content functions more as clickbait rather than providing like a genuine attempt to inform. Junk news can be so deeply dangerous because we don't have enough information. Okay, so I am going to go to the next slide. And this information comes from the Foolproof book that I showed at the beginning. Okay, so whoa, let me come back over here. All right, so the human brain uses rules of thumb to make predictions about what it sees. One of these rules is that repeated truth or false claims doesn't matter. If it's false, it doesn't matter. they feel more familiar and therefore are more likely to be true. This phenomenon is known as the illusory truth effect. So basically, if I hear about this topic a lot, then it must be true. It must be true, whether it's true or not. So, wow, there's so much we could do with that, right? There's so much we could analyze on that besides the typo. There's a lot there. So I'm going to pause with this. I'm going to upload this, let you get started on this, and then I'm going to record the second half tomorrow. Hope you have a great day. Bye.